Quick update on the PD, a few things going on. I don't know if you saw the news and social media. Since November, we've had some serious crashes involving cruisers, them being rear-ended on Route 9. So we have 4 cruisers that are out of service right now, 3 are total. So we're working on those replacements. I'm pleased to report there were no serious injuries to any of our officers or the people involved. One was a drunk driver. That was the November crash that totaled the supervisor's cruiser. But we are continuing to march with a fleet that's a little short right now. The other thing I wanted to bring about, I know we're in a pandemic, and we talk about the opiate crisis, and kind of everything went aside. Just to show you where we're at, we've utilized Narcan on 2 different individuals. One, a young lady we had to use 3 doses for. She is alive. And I'd like to commend, our officers, for getting there in a timely fashion, deploying Narcan to save 2 individuals' lives. So we're really pleased. Never did I think, 33 years ago when I began my policing journey that Narcan would be standard equipment for police officers. But we're glad to have it, and we're glad to be able to save lives. There was one other incident involving another officer, John Sweeney, who came and spoke to you about security and scams. He happened to be on a medical call with the fire department when someone came out to his cruiser choking, couldn't breathe. He gave the Heimlich maneuver and saved that individual's life. And DA Early is coming in February to give him the team award. And we'll give him the life-saving award. So very, very proud of the staff, of the work they do every day, and just want to really give them kudos. And lastly, 2 other updates. I'd like to obviously introduce my Deputy Chief here today, Todd Minardi. Absolute rock star. He's going to be a phenomenal chief someday. And then we have Lieutenant Mike Daniels. So I told you that promotion would be imminent. He was promoted this week. And obviously with sadness, we were sad to see Lieutenant McLeod, his retirement was granted. And we wish him well. He was an absolutely phenomenal employee, someone that helped me out greatly when I first came. He was my first promotion, my first lieutenant promotion, and I can't thank him enough for all his support and his hard work for the time that he was here for his 25 plus years. I mean, just a phenomenal employee. And lastly, you'll see the town manager and the superintendent will be my guests next month. They're going to talk about the budget. And I wanted just to kind of tell you that, we obviously we have a hiring plan. That hiring plan, because of the pandemic, was put on hold. We made several cuts to our budget, so I'm going to talk to you more about that next month because March is town meeting, and we're going to need your support. So we're hoping that you come to town meeting, and like I said, it's your voice. If you don't agree with something that's going on, vote no. I'm good with that. But what we're going to propose is not nice to have, it's needs for you, it's needs for the community, because we're here to serve, and we really appreciate it. It's an honor. And as the temporary caretaker of this agency, I can't thank you enough every month for coming out and supporting the police. And I want to introduce someone who I've known for a very long time, Senator Michael Moore. Back when I was in Auburn, we did collaborate together on different issues. Some of you may know and may not know, I was on the school committee when I was in Auburn. I was actually chair at a time when we built a middle school. We did a lot of work to get that school approved. And a little historic data on that is the high school took, I think, 9 or 10 years before it was approved. We were able to get the middle school approved in about a year and a half. Senator Moore was instrumental in supporting the public safety, the school department. As you may or may not know, we were redistricted. He is our new state senator, and I can tell you, just a phenomenal human being, huge supporter. He's going to work extremely hard for Westboro. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Senator Michael Moore.
Good morning. How was breakfast? Well, it's nice to come out here and meet you. don't know what the chief was talking about. I think you all know that we just did redistricting in the state, Massachusetts. So every 10 years they have to do the census and the redistrict. Well, starting in January of 2023, so next coming January, I will myself, or we have an election coming up, someone from the second Worcester district will be representing you at the state in the state senate. Hopefully it's me. Look forward to meeting all of you, just trying to find out what your concerns are. But so for the rest of this year, Senator Eldridge will continue to represent the town, but I will be out here getting to know you, because I'll be on the ballot trying to represent you after January. I think you're going to find my office is very constituent service based. I think Chief Lourie will tell you that when I was in Auburn, matter of fact, we have our office hours at every senior center that I represent. So I think we've already scheduled it here with your senior center director to make sure you have someone out here so that we can start meeting with you. And if you want a personal meeting with me, just let them know and I'll come out, I'll have a private coffee, you can sit and we can talk and try to figure out what we can try to do to help. But, so I've been in office now since 2009. I've chaired various committees. I've chaired the Higher Education Committee, Small Business and Community Development. I chaired the Public Safety Committee for a year and a half, and now I am the chair of Post Audit and Oversight. And basically what that does everyone know what the state auditor does in Massachusetts? Well, the state auditor does audits of every state agency, and they have to do it every 2 to 3 years. Well, the House and the Senate has a committee called Post Audit, and if there's any issues that arise, we are empowered to investigate those issues if we want to try to figure out if there's an issue going on. Are we all familiar with the fraud that's taking place with DUA, or DUI, the unemployment insurance? It's been going on with overpayments, and well, right now we're conducting what's called an oversight hearing. So we've had we've had the Secretary of Workforce and Labor come in and tell us what's going on with the different types of fraud, the overpayments, and we're trying to resolve that issue, trying to figure out a way to, I guess, there's about $2.9 billion of overpayments. Yeah. So the state of Massachusetts, and not just like every other state, during the pandemic, we were hit with something that we, in our lifetime, we've only ever seen. We haven't had a pandemic like this in a long, long time. So they were completely, I won't say understaffed. They did gear up and hire more people, but just wasn't enough staffing to accomplish an accurate oversight of what was going on. So now there's what they call clawback measures. So we're looking to go back. There's two forms of unemployment insurance. There's the regular unemployment insurance, and then there's what we call the PUA, which is the pandemic special funding that came from the federal government and through us. Well, the problem we have, there was so many people that were applying. Right now, during the hearing we had about 2 weeks ago, there are 271,000 people who received an overpayment in their unemployment benefits. And that was just from the federal money dealing with the pandemic. Then we have the traditional unemployment insurance, which there was 171,000 people who were overpaid. So we got to try to figure out a way to, I guess, work with the individuals who receive the overpayment, yet at the same time try to protect the small businesses, because the people who contribute to the fund, the unemployment fund, are your businesses, small businesses, large businesses, and 86% of the economy is made up of small businesses. So it's the mom and pop place that you have in the center of town here that you go down and you visit and support. They're the ones that actually support the economy. Everyone keeps thinking it's Walmart or these big, large corporations. It's really the small business, the small entrepreneur. So we're going to try to figure out a way of recouping the money from the overpayments, yet at the same time, what we don't recoup, the small businesses will have to pay a higher unemployment rate in the state. So right now, we're trying to figure out a way to address that issue without hurting either side. But again, so I've been in office. So basically, I've been in office for 13 years. This is my 14th year after, hopefully after this 2022. Some of my major, I guess, legislative accomplishments. If you look back, does anyone have a child? Like, shouldn't ask that question. I'm going to say a child with a developmental disability or someone in your family. Well, what we did about 2 years ago, it's called Nikki's Law. It's a law that there was a loophole in the hiring process of providers who provide services for people with developmental disabilities. So you would apply for a position, you go for a query. Well, query, or what they call your criminal record, only shows what you've been charged or convicted with. The problem we were having with providers who were providing services for people with developmental disability is they would hire someone, they would do the query, but little unknowns to them is you had people that were going from one provider to the next provider, and what was happening is they would victimize someone with developmental disability, which a lot of times the family members did not want to go forward with the prosecution. Because it could, what happens the first time there's a charge or some sort of salacious crime that happens? It's in the media. And a lot of people with developmental disabilities may have issues where they can't express themselves orally, or they just don't want the recognition being out in the media of having been a victim of a crime. So a lot of times the families would just sign an agreement or the provider, and they would terminate the person. Now, it's not on their criminal record, so that person would then go from company A to company B. Company B would do the criminal record, would try to do the backgrounds on the person, but because there was no formal charge, we found that there were many people that were, I shouldn't say many, there were people who were taking advantage of the system, and they would go from one employer or provider to the next provider, and they would get hired by the next provider, and then they would again start to victimize people. And it wasn't at fault of the provider because they did the thorough check. It's just that there was no criminal charges. So what we did is now anytime a person victimizes an individual with a developmental disability, their employer has to spit the name to the state, and it's going on a registry. And it's going to be a registry of all individuals who have victimized someone with a disability. And now when a new provider or employer wants to hire someone, they have to run that name through the registry. This way we don't have anyone falling through the cracks of not having a criminal charge filed against them. And I got that passed about 2 years ago. The other piece of legislation I think that I'm hoping will be appreciated in the years to come is I filed the bill and actually drafted the bill and worked it through was the bill dealing with sexual assaults on college campuses. I know when I was chairing the higher education committee about 6 years ago, there were 11 colleges in Massachusetts, universities, that were being investigated by the federal government for violating the rights of individuals, mainly victims. So we worked with all the state colleges and universities, the various law enforcement departments, and we developed new standards and protocols that was passed into law that state colleges and universities have to provide. So they have to provide on-site remediation programs, and then they also have to provide off-site. Now, you all see it in the news. You have people that come forward and say, I was victimized 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and everyone always asks, why is the person not coming forward? Well, a lot of times today in society, the victim gets re-victimized in the media, so they don't come forward. And what happens is eventually when they start, after counseling and start dealing with it, they get the strength and courage to come forward. And then they have to deal with the ridicule being attacked. Because people sit here and say, oh, that happened 20 years ago, why are you coming forward now? Or that happened a year ago. And we found one of the things I learned the most from this development drafting this legislation was that most victims don't immediately come forward. Usually colleges, universities, if students get assaulted, they usually wait. And by the time they file a complaint, the victim or the accused may have graduated already, or maybe in a year he's moved on to some other location, but the case doesn't get prosecuted. And the victim, again, they don't want their name publicly. So we try to do in this legislation to give them a little bit more authority. Whether the student now, you've been victimized, you can go forward to someone who's, we call it a confidential advisor in the colleges and universities, that has to keep the information confidential. They're almost like an ombudsman or a liaison telling the student, if you've been victimized and you want to go to the police, these are the steps that are going to take place. If you don't want to go to the police and you just want to do the administrative process in schools and universities, this is the system, this is what's going to take place. So it's a way of educating them, but the schools, whether the person comes forward or not with a prosecution or some sort of administrative action against the victim, the schools are required to provide counseling and services to these students. The other piece of legislation that I've been most happy to been part of. Everyone remember the shooting that took place out in Las Vegas? And they had what was called a bump stock. Well, myself and two other individuals in the Senate were the ones that wrote or drafted that legislation to ban bump stocks in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is Massachusetts is the only state that ended up passing legislation banning the bump stock. So there was talk from Presley about doing something in Congress, but that never moved forward. So Massachusetts was one of the only states to pass this legislation. I was talking with several senior center directors yesterday, and we're going to be doing a second ARPA funding bill. So this is the federal money coming down to the states. We've roughly got about $12 billion between now and 2024 to invest back into our communities. And we're looking at senior centers as obviously trying to give them more support. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday was trying to find a way to provide funding to your senior centers that's going to allow them to provide more services, whether it's dealing with people who are stuck in their home and they need to be contacted, whether it's mental health services. A lot of the conversation over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot, is the effect of the pandemic on kids being home, not in school. But one thing that's kind of fallen through the crack is our seniors. What about the seniors that have been stuck at home and they haven't been able to go? They haven't been able to socialize with people. So we were talking yesterday about maybe trying to look at a way to create a program to enhance the ability of the senior center directors to outreach to you, whether it's bringing food, whether it's bringing a counselor, or in some way. I don't know if Westport has it, the Are You OK program?
I think they're trying to implement it.
What's that?
If the fire chief here, he could explain, but I don't believe it's up and running right now, but it was in the works at one point.
Okay. I could barely hear you with the mask.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So that's good. So many years ago, I was with the sheriff's office also. And part of my work there was working with programs for seniors. So we had programs like the Are You OK program. We had a light program where the sheriff's office at that time, we would give away a light, a special color light that people could put on their houses so that if you had a medical emergency come up, if the police are driving down your street and they see that light on, they know directly where to go instead of having to look at the house numbers. So it's trying to enhance, or give the senior centers more resources to try to give to you, try to provide to you for your communities. So a little background, I probably should have done this earlier. I was previously before getting elected, I was with the State Environmental Police for roughly 22 years. What I did with them was I worked out of the Attorney General's office, and we investigated companies that illegally disposed of hazardous waste, solid waste, medical waste, and we would work with them and we would prosecute them. I did that for about 22 years. And then I went to the Sheriff's Office in Worcester, where I oversaw their reentry programs for inmates. I oversaw these senior programs. So we worked with as many senior centers as possible, trying to provide services with the resources of the Sheriff's Office. And now being in the Senate for about 13 to 14 years, so roughly I've been a public servant for probably like 35 years. I love the job. I love the opportunity to meet people. find out how we can be helpful to you. And I think hopefully you'll agree after, by the time the elections come, that you're going to find my office very accessible. We'll reach out to you as much as we can, but please don't feel like you can't reach out to us. The only difficulty I will say right now is where Senator Eldridge is still the senator for the next remaining 12 months. I, or whoever wins the election, will take over in January of 2023. So right now you've got a little transition period. Every elected official will have to be trying to adapt to this new district or this new representation that they're going to be providing. I hate to just give long dissertations of what we speak. I much prefer to have a question and answer type thing. Does anyone here have any questions they would like to ask that I can try to help out with?
Senator Moore, thank you for coming out today. The two bills that you put through to try to curtail the caretakers that are taking abuse of medical
The
challenges.
Nichols Law.
Okay. We have laws in the state to protect people. They don't seem to work as well as they should. Start with the gentleman that killed the motorcyclist up in New Hampshire. He'd had his license revoked several times, and he still was driving for a company. So somebody didn't input the information. That seems to be a common problem. We've got this young girl, a 7-year-old, that's disappeared for 2 years, that nobody reported. That's baffling to me. You know, and the judge in Lowell or Lawrence gave the father, who was in criminal custody of the child. There's something missing in these situations.
Yeah, you have to remember, for every state law that we create, every state law that's passed, there's always someone out there that can find a loophole in that law.
Yeah.
So, what you're talking about first with the drunk driving, right now nationally there's reciprocity between each state, so that if someone is convicted in say New Hampshire or Rhode Island or New York and they lose their license, well, we have reciprocity, so we would here in Massachusetts would honor that suspension, and vice versa. But the problem is, unless the person's actually in jail, you can be convicted of drunk driving 3 times, 4 times.
Yeah.
The police aren't sitting out front of your house watching you. So if the opportunity presents themselves to drive, as you've seen with a person with multiple arrests, they take advantage of that situation and they drive. There's no way you can watch someone 24 hours a day unless
Right.
So that's really more falls upon the character of the individual, whether they're going to obey the law and not continue to drive. But the issue with the girl from New Hampshire, we're actually looking at right now, that's another issue. Once we wrap up this oversight hearing into the DUI issue, we're actually going to be looking at doing an oversight hearing into that whole issue, what happened. Because basically what happened was the little girl disappeared for 2 years. Her mother was claiming benefits for the child, even though the question now comes if the child probably was not with her. The father, the DCF approved the child going to New Hampshire with the father. Now there's issues with that also, because the father had an extensive criminal record. I think he had served time for attempted murder, and there was other domestic, there were other violent crimes on his criminal history. So we have to figure out how DCF worked with the New Hampshire officials, and was there proper oversight that was given. Massachusetts also, in the handling of adoption cases, we have an interstate compact. So basically what that is I'm going to adopt a child from New Hampshire, or actually, we just had someone from Ohio. We had a person here in my district that was adopting a child from Ohio. We have an interstate compact. What Ohio wants, or Massachusetts wants, is an inspection done. We have agreements that each state will provide inspections of the potential foster parents or parents, and then they report it back. There was an issue with New Hampshire in the ICP, the interstate program, where there was not forgetting the legal term. There's a term for oversight for the parent by having inspections done by DCF in both states. Well, there was no, I guess when the child was released to the parent on that interstate compact, there was not language in there mandating inspections by the state regulatory entity, and that's how this child actually fell through the, because they fell through the cracks, kind of fell through the system. So we're going to be looking at basically what happened, how can we stop it in the future. One issue that we have right now, and this is where state government takes, talk about bureaucracy, there's an Office of Child Advocate. So right now, we have to wait for the Office of Child Advocate. They are going to do an internal investigation. It's almost like their internal affairs dealing with DCF. So they're going to do an internal investigation to see if they can determine why or how this happened. And then when that's done, we will basically have a hearing. We call everyone in to testify, and they have to justify or explain to us what happened. Post-audit in the House and Senate are the only two committees in the legislature that have what's called subpoena authority. So we could actually, if someone was creating roadblocks, we could actually issue subpoenas and force them to come in and testify and provide materials. But that's something we're going to try to get a better grasp on after the Child Advocacy Office completes their investigation. But again, this is, people always talk about, well, I saw this person collecting unemployment when they shouldn't be. I saw this person do this wrong, and that's against state law. You got to remember, it's for every state law that's passed, there's people who are smart enough to find that loophole. And that's really where it falls upon the person and the character there, that they're not going to be abusing or taking advantage of the system. For this UI, the oversight hearing we're doing, we're looking at right now, we don't know whether the overpayments for the PUA, we saw get 270,000 people. We don't know yet how the unemployment insurance was doing their calculations or review to determine who was committing fraud and who wasn't. So we have to look at the whole fraud aspect of that also. So we're going to be talking to the Attorney General's office. We're trying to figure out ways how we can better give DCF better tools, or how can we give the state better tools and how to recognize or prosecute fraud related to workers' compensation. Anything else?
No.
Anything else? So, okay.
You mentioned all this money that was taken by fraud.
Well, we don't really, right now it's been identified as overpayments.
Okay, what is an overpayment?
Overpayment, basically what overpayment was the pandemic hits, all of a sudden this money starts coming into the Commonwealth, and what normally, the caseload that what normally was being handled by unemployment insurance quadruples. So they don't have the staff, and it turns out there was actually problems with the technology. The technology was out of date, so they are right now in the process of purchasing new technology, and the level's going down now. They have more capacity now to try to look into these cases, determine how they're going to resolve the overpayments, or look at what was potentially fraud.
Is there any specific plan to get the money back?
Well, that's what's being discussed. There's two sets of thinking here. There's one is, because of the pandemic and they were so overburdened with the amount of claims coming in, there may have been a rush to get the benefits out. That doesn't mean someone was committing fraud. But what happened was, when the Division of Unemployment Insurance looked at it, they may have gave higher numbers than the person was supposed to get. There was really it's no fault of the person who put the claim in. It wasn't fraud. The Division of Unemployment Insurance looked at it and they said, okay, you're going to get $1,000 a month, or $2,000 a month. Well, they might have been only entitled to $1,000 a month. And that was really because the amount of claims coming in was just exceeding the capacity of DUI to really just thoroughly investigate what was being submitted and how much they should have been reimbursing. So a lot of this, the problem we have now is you have people that put claims in. They were told by DUA, this is what this is what you're going to get on a monthly basis. And if you went to the state agency and they said, okay, this is what you're entitled to, and you started collecting that, should you be held at fault a year later if they come back at you and say, we made a mistake and we overpaid you? So I guess here's a question. How many people here think that the state should come back and go after that money from those people? Okay. Just one.
Well, I don't understand the question. You're saying that an overpayment was made,
An overpayment
there was no fraud intended
No
on the part of
fraud.
the recipient.
The employee at DUA looked at it, and they analyzed and said, okay, you're entitled to this much money, and then you start receiving it.
Okay, so far so good. But then in a review afterwards, it's determined that that was an overpayment.
Correct.
So is the question, should there...
Should we go back, and it's called, this is what the clawback provision is called.
Right.
Should we go back and now recoup those funds?
Right, I'm just clarifying your question.
Yep.
Okay. And I would say absolutely. Now, that may impose a hardship, but the person is not going to be in any worse shape than they may have been had they not received the unemployment, right?
Well, as we know right now, we have a lot of people, we have a severe shortage of workers. So a lot of people right now, that money is gone, because they were using that to,
Well, that's another issue, right?
But
Their
it's-
ability to repay is something that has to be dealt with. And, for example, perhaps other benefits get suspended until that debt is resolved. I mean,
Okay.
I know that sounds a little harsh,
Yep.
but that is an unintended benefit that the person, whether or not there was fraud involved, realized, and I think the state should recover that money.
Yeah, otherwise, other people have to pay for it.
Well,
Which means all of us.
There's a whole system here.
There'll be a tax somewhere where the
Well,
rest
see,
of
this
us
is,
pick it up.
now what you're discussing, what we're talking about now, is what we're trying to discuss in the legislature.
Right.
So we're trying to determine, do we go back and seek those funds from people who may not have that money anymore? The average overpayment for the pandemic-related unemployment insurance, the average overpayment was over $11,000 for these, per person. That's the average.
All right, so
For
if I
the,
can
for the
interrupt you-
unemployment insurance, the straight unemployment insurance, it's the overpayment was about $2,600.
If I can interrupt you
No,
then.
go right ahead.
Let's say Bank of America inadvertently pays me too much money, right?
Yep.
I wrote a check for $1,000, they gave me 10. They realize the auditors in the back room the next day or a week later said, wait a minute. Bank of America is going to come back to me and say, you owe me $9,000. We made a mistake, but you have to pay that back.
Right.
So that same concept should apply with the relationship between the state and its citizens as well.
That's one way of thinking.
There's another way?
Yeah, the other way is, and there's actually, the other way is, there's actually legislation that's been filed to waive the clawback provision and not go after that extra money. Because I have colleagues who feel that it's been no mistake of the person who put the claim in, that the state said, okay, this is how much you get. It wasn't me going in there saying, hey, I should get $1,000 a month. It was the state saying it. So I have colleagues who feel that people may not have the money, so it's going to be harder to claw back or get them to reimburse the state for the overpayment.
But at least that debt should be of record. Whether the person can repay it or not is another issue. It's just like if I were to say to Bank of America, sorry, whole lot of money.
Yep.
I mean, they're going to go to court and get a judgment against me. So any future transactions, that is of record, right? So you can't get blood out of the stone. I understand that. But if we don't, as a commonwealth, right, which means we all share in this, if we as a commonwealth say, oh, well, we're just going to forgive that because we made a mistake, I think that's faulty reasoning and is so endemic in the way politics is handled in this state.
Well, so this is the issue. The numbers I gave you, right now, when the Secretary of Labor and Workforce came in, she identified 171,000 active cases. And this is where we've got to get clarification of active, ongoing cases that they have to resolve. So we don't yet have the full figure of how many people were actually overpaid from the date that this first went into effect. So it could have been, instead of 171,000 active cases they have now, it actually could be, when we're done, 400,000 people that overpaid.
Which is not relevant, whether it's 1 or 500,000.
And then that's the same thing with the pandemic insurance. Well, see, so this is the philosophy, the thinking that's going on. We have colleagues who want to forgive the clawback. Now we have the business community coming forward, and as you're saying, they're saying, no, go back and actually perform the clawback, because the small businesses, through the unemployment insurance, they're actually paying into the trust fund. So if we don't go back and claw back, their rates are going to go higher. So the business community is asking us to do the clawback. Yet we have other advocacy groups and some colleagues saying that we shouldn't do it.
Well, where do you stand?
I think we should go back and try to recoup the money. I think we should make sure that there's a flexible plan to try to address the needs of the individuals who may not have financial resources to pay it back as soon as possible. So that's something we're trying to get from the state agency right now, is they've been telling us that they have a flexible payment plan. But we're trying to figure out what that means. Is it a monthly payment? Is it a yearly payment? Is it when you get your tax returns, instead of getting your tax returns, it sees it? And so we're trying to work with it. But I do agree that the burden should not be put on the small businesses.
Well, it's a zero-sum game, right?
Correct.
Somebody pays, somebody loses.
Yep.
And in terms of equity, people who arrived at a benefit, however it came, that they were not entitled to, should repay. How the mechanism is, and whether it's out for 10 years or whatever, that's a nuance and a detail. I think you first establish you were overpaid, or give them an opportunity to show where they were. I think that would be part of the process, I presume.
There's an appeal process, an internal due process for the individuals. But that's right now, so with the oversight hearing we had, these are the options that are coming before us that we're going to have to, at some point, make a recommendation for. And this is the problem we have. As I said, 86% of the economy is built on small business. So if we keep raising the unemployment compensation rates on them, that's going to put more of a strain on them.
And they're going to hire less people because it's
expensive. They're going to hire less people, or because of the
Right.
pandemic, they may close, we don't know. So these are one of the things that we have to look at.
And just one last thing. I don't think you adequately answered Jay with regard to the motorcycle accident, right? You basically used the term loophole. What I understand from the media is that the RMV had, in a back room, mountains of these forms where other states had reported people's...
You're right,
So that isn't a loophole. That's a process that wasn't followed.
But even if that process, what I was trying to get at, even if that process was followed, and the person's license was revoked here in Massachusetts to operate, unless you have a police officer sitting outside their house, that person could still get in the car and drive again.
Right, but
Not
then
legal.
his employer would have hired him knowing he had a suspended license and would have incurred more liability, I presume.
Well, yes, I guess I'm going to getting deeper into the weeds. I'm just saying, as far as the state law is, Massachusetts gets notified by whatever state that this person may have lost their right to operate a vehicle. You are right, there was, a few years ago, there was an issue with the R&D where they were not processing those suspensions adequately, and we had people whose license to operate had been suspended other places that were still operating. But all I'm saying, even if the system was perfect,
I understand.
you can't stop that.
But the system didn't even get a chance to do it because they didn't do their fundamentals.
Yes, they were behind, a year and a half worth.
Behind, yeah. I mean, that, suspending licenses, the whole purpose of an RMV is to issue licenses. And if you're driving a truck, obviously danger is much greater. And if you've got a guy on drugs with a very bad driving history, and you say, here's your license, you're failing in your basic duty.
Yeah, don't disagree with you.
All right, Jack?
If we go back to this unemployment, whether it's federal or state, is there a problem with looking at an overpayment as a loan to a person who are really entitled to it, you expect it back and put them on some kind of a payment plan
Say that
for the
again?
rest of it. Couldn't we look at that overpayment on the part of the government, whether it was the state or the federal government? You got this overpaid, you were not entitled to it, you're gonna treat it like a loan and you have to pay back. You have to have it again.
Well, that's what when we talk about a flexible plan, what are they actually doing as working with these individuals? Are they doing it like a loan, allowing them to make payments on a monthly basis? Or are they going to try to get a large lump
I
sum?
think it makes a difference in how you present it. If you were overpaid, I mean, I think we're all subject to what you hear on social media.
Yes.
There are people out there that are making more money, staying home than they would if they went to work. Now, if this is part of that, and I think it may be an overstatement, but if you got more than you should have gotten, I think the way our society has always been is you work for what you get, and you don't stand on the line looking for a handout.
Yep.
And I think we need to encourage more people to stand on their own two feet. That's all I'm saying. I just think it's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I just want to say in general that I think by 2 studies, one showed Massachusetts is number 4 in the country, one showed it's number 7 in the number of people moving out of the state to live somewhere else. And I may be one of those people one day. And I just want to say that I think the inefficiencies in government here and the cost of living are driving people out of the state. So I just want to emphasize to you as a state senator that, having things done properly so that these mistakes don't keep happening and frustrating people and costing people of their own pocket for the mistakes that, are made elsewhere. And then just the high cost of living in general here with wanting to increase gas taxes and, there's just a lot of frustrating stuff that goes on here that I think makes it hard for seniors to afford to live here and encourages those that can to leave. And people are basically voting with their feet. And as I said, we're number 4 or number 7 based on United Van Lines versus, somebody else. But people are leaving the state. That's how they're showing their displeasure. So I may be one of those people. So I just want to say, these efficiencies matter and these inefficiencies matter, and just constantly raising taxes and asking more for small business and making it hard for businesses to operate here, these things will drive people away.
I don't disagree with you, but just so you know, and actually part of the meeting we had yesterday, Massachusetts, the tax burden, people, we all, I guess, I think all of the age here will remember when they used to call Massachusetts Taxachusetts.
Yes.
Oh, but people still try to call. People still say, oh, we're Taxachusetts here. Massachusetts, we are roughly, in total tax burden, out of 50 states, we're roughly 27th. So we're right in the middle of tax burden on the citizens of the country, the citizens of our state. So the theory that you're going to move to New York or maybe DC or I'm just
Florida.
No, not New York.
Tennessee.
New Hampshire, Florida.
well,
Florida.
some
North
of the
Carolina.
theory, well, the theory that you're going to pay less taxes in 23 of those states are actually going to pay more taxes. Now, there are some states, like Florida and New Hampshire, several Florida, but New Hampshire doesn't have an income tax.
They don't have the services.
They don't have the services, they don't have the infrastructure that we're paying for here, that you have to pay for here. The cost of living is higher here, but you do get more for your money in this area. So the tax burden part, we are roughly right in the middle. The days of Massachusetts are over. People don't want to acknowledge that. No one likes to pay taxes. So, but the services that you're getting here is paid for through the taxes we collect. We have formula grants that they will tell you that that's how senior centers get their funding. This is a formula grant, and that's obviously through the taxes that come in. You gotta remember, the state is not a business. We don't create products. We provide services. So the only way to provide a service is through revenue that is collected from the taxpayers or through business. And just like your town here, the only way to increase your services and not increase the taxes on the residents the private citizens is to increase their commercial base.
I disagree with that. I think the third way is to improve the processes and the efficiencies of government. And we just addressed a few somewhat emotional cases where the processes were inadequate. When I go to Bank of America and I want to transact, they have things that prevent fraud, right? I'm settling an estate for a relative who recently died, and you wouldn't believe the kind of things I've had to go through to document who I am, getting medallion stamps and all of this stuff I had never even heard about. And this is where commercial enterprises have presumably efficient processes and avoid fraud, right? Because they have a financial motivation, a profit motive. The state, and this is just a perception, and we're picking out anecdotes, I understand, doesn't seem to have the systems or the ability to execute their mission.
I'm going to disagree with you there. I'm going to disagree with you there.
That's okay, that's what we're here.
You got to remember the private sector, if there's inefficiencies in their system or there are losses that are incurred, that's not in the paper. That's not in the newspaper. And you don't hear people, the outcry if it's Bank of America or it's a private company. If you're a local, if you're a city, town, or state government, and there's a glitch in the system or there's technology issues, the first thing you see, it's never good news we see in the media. They always highlight the negative. So the issue with the services, you may have at times, the smaller government gets, I'm not one for a huge government, but you gotta remember, the smaller government gets, the harder it is to handle the amount of work that comes in every day. And so with the registry, that was a glaring gap. That was an employee who wasn't doing their required responsibilities. That can happen in the private sector, and it's obviously happened in the state sector.
But in that case, they also didn't have the systems.
Well, they had a system. The person was supposed to they were supposed to be entering those into their database, and that was not being done.
The point is, it's a paper-driven system, and this is the 21st century.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
So yes, there could have been better technology there, but now the technology, again, to purchase the technology, you've got to evaluate the systems, and now with the capability of terrorists with cyber attacks, you've got the cost of technology goes higher because now you've got to purchase technology that has higher standards of protection. So there's always, even when we go through and you're trying to improve efficiencies, there's always additional costs that are going to be incurred to try to bring the long-term costs down. Did I explain that properly?
Well, we're talking generalities, and I realize these are anecdotes, and I get all that. And I'm not saying all state government's bad, obviously not. But there is a general sense that if you invest in systems and people in advance, before you start handing money out, you'll realize that savings.
Well, the problem that happened with the UI is that, again, no one predicted a pandemic.
Agreed.
So when the pandemic hit, and then they started getting overwhelmed with the amount of people applying for services, the technology platforms that they were using were not adequate.
Right.
So they freely acknowledge that, and they are changing the technology to come up to speed with what they need today. But we still have to look into the other aspects of what is going on, what could go on.
And the issue there is establishing that debt is owed back to the state.
Yes, they've done a good job documenting who's overpaid.
Mm-hmm.
The question now in the State House is going to be, do we require people to claw back, do the clawback, or do we not? Do we waive it? So, but now you've got two sets of thinking at the State House on how to handle it.
How about we ask the question, how do we handle it, rather than should we?
Well, it's going to be handled, but the direction is which way?
I think it depends on when it's presented.
Well, in what way? Well, I guess, I understand your point. The problem is, even if you present it and say, again, those active cases I told you about with the pandemic unemployment insurance, is 270,000. Well, that's just active. We haven't gotten the final figure from them when it first took place. It could be 500,000. And then the other, so that the question there is, if you made the first 220,000 people pay, why would you be now not requiring the rest to pay back the clawback? So that's just an issue that we're dealing with as far as the oversight hearing goes.
Instead of looking at it as either they pay back or they don't, if they're still an employee, I'm sure there are jobs the government can find them to do that they could earn their money back.
That would have to be dealing with the employer reaching out.
Well, the state could find, I'm sure, plenty of opportunities for these people to come and actually work for the money that they were overpaid. Especially if they're still collecting unemployment.
And again, now, if you get 200,000 people on the pandemic insurance and then another 171,000 people on the traditional UI, do you know the amount of staff that we would have to hire, the state would have to hire to start reaching out to all these businesses that employ these people?
Well, the state could have them do things, clean up parks, plant trees. I mean, there's lots of things that people could do to earn the money back.
Process suspension forms.
File,
There you go.
for filing.
So, not to change the topic, but if you remember when the pandemic first hit, and this is, I guess, going to be patting ourselves and the governor on the back. If you remember the pandemic first hit, we were estimated at having a budget deficit of about $6 billion. So a year ago, July, when we were going into the budget, we were thinking, well, months leading up to it, we think, oh God, we're going to have to slash services. But what happened over the course of that year, we ended up, instead of having a budget deficit of $6 billion, we ended up having a surplus of $1.5 billion.
Why?
Because the economy did not, the economy increased the busier during the pandemic. Basically what you had is, package stores had record years. Home Depot and Lowe's, they had big years. People taking the pandemic money, they were doing a lot of work at home. Then we had restaurants that, there were some there that were hurting, but we had other restaurants that were flourishing because of the technology we have out there now with DoorDash and, what is it, Uber Eats. We got Uber Eats, that restaurants were actually, some of the restaurants were doing better. So the economy actually surprised everyone. So we went from actually having we went from a deficit, I think we're going to have a deficit, to a $1.5 billion surplus. This year, as we speak right now, if the tax revenues keep coming in as they are, we could be looking at over a $2 billion surplus. Now you're taking the fact that we had, the federal government gave us $5 billion last year. We actually just allocated $4 billion about 2 months ago. We did legislation dealing with trying to give extra funding to all the services throughout the Commonwealth. We used $2.5 billion of that $5 billion, and we took the surplus of $1.5, and we just spent just allocated $4 billion to different policy areas to try to deal with what we're still facing with the pandemic. Then the federal government just passed maybe a few months ago, President Biden signed that infrastructure bill. Well, out of that infrastructure bill, Massachusetts is slated to get close to $12 billion. So over the next year, we've got $12 billion, then we got the 2.5 remaining from last year, and if we have another $2 billion surplus, we could have close to $16 billion that we can be using to reinvest back into the communities. whether it's giving money for senior centers, whether it's giving money for enhanced police patrols, or health insurance, or health coverage. So we're actually in a very good situation right now in Massachusetts financially. And we're going to be doing next Thursday, we're going to be doing another bill that it's supposed to be getting released from committee either, actually I was going to say the end of this week, but this is the end of this week, early next week, where we're going to be passing hopefully another $55 million that's going to be going back into local services to try to deal with the pandemic. One of the things that I was speaking to with the committee yesterday is about trying to create a grant program for the council on aging or senior centers to deal with trying to provide more research, more services dealing with the outreach to seniors who have been homebound. Anything else we can? Did I bore you enough already? Or?
Thank you.
Out of curiosity, I read the list of agencies and other places that are getting some of that $2.5 billion. The majority of it is going towards business support schools, which is perfect. There is literally nothing for people of our quote-unquote generation. Had there been any talk in committee on allocating that money to create what I would call like a care package for seniors? In other words, send all of the seniors in the state, and it's easy to figure out who they are. It's, for lack of a better term, a Stop and Shop gift card for $50 so they can help support their food budget.
No, there's been no discussion of something similar to that.
That's what I was told.
I can get you a breakdown.
But why is that? Why does it seem like the senior population? I know what you just said about the $55 million going to senior centers and support services, but it doesn't seem as though it's been done on a personal type outreach situation. I was just curious about that.
I know
Well,
Hurricane got us $25,000 for our food pantry in the
Okay.
last bill of that extra money. I know that was a grant that came to us.
See, the way we did the way the ARPA funding was done was the administration, when we first got the money from the federal government, the legislature required the governor to work with us on this, and we would pass some funding vehicles. So basically, when I say funding vehicles, legislation. So the legislation we did last January, so 2 months ago, I can get you a breakdown of that, but it was pretty diverse as far as the different programs that were going to be supported. What we did is, instead of the legislature directing funding directly to this line item or this line item, or I should say this program, we did it by policy area. So we did it, and we gave the administration the authority. Remember, the legislature does not run the day-to-day. The day-to-day operation is done by the governor, similar to your town manager. They run the day-to-day operation. We provide the financial support or whatever legislative support that they need to operate. But there was, again, out of that $4 billion, there was some additional money that went back to Health and Human Services, which was going to affect seniors, but there was nothing passed to promote a program where you're going to get a gift card or something like that. You got to remember, politically, one of the strongest voting blocks in any state.
But they're not organized.
No, but seniors vote. Seniors vote. People come out and you may not think that you're getting enough resources, but seniors are always one of the school aid or local aid for your cities and towns, for town services. And seniors are probably top on the list as far as what people look at for programs to try to fund. That's why you see elected officials always going to the senior centers and trying to interact with seniors, because they know a lot of you pay attention and you all vote and you need the resources.
One last quick question on the unemployment insurance clawback situation. The example of Bank of America, where you write a check for $1,000 and they give you $10,000, you know when you look at your bank balance that you were overpaid by $9,000. You know that. Whether you want to give it back or not, that's a story for another day. My question would be, many of the people that applied for unemployment insurance, back whether it was last year, 2021, or 20, or even 19, when you file and go through the process on the state's website, you get a response, whether it's, you know, in 24 hours or 24 days, you get a response. It's a form letter, and it tells you, you know, we have processed your claim, blah, 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 you're approved for $212. And then you're picking a number on it.
And in defense of that person that gets that notification from the state, they're not, and I think most people, most of us, we got that from the state saying you're entitled to this much unemployment. None of us really know how to figure that formula out.
Yeah,
so they are trusting the state to be accurate in the figures.
That's where I'm going. I mean, you get this letter, it's on a state letterhead, it's signed by the director, the department head of the employment insurance, and you take that as quote unquote, oh, okay, this is what I'm entitled to, and until I find another job, this is what I would expect to get weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it is. Why does that now become the individual's fault for accepting that payment and that amount as a clawback? So let's say that 212 should have been 178. Why is it that person's problem? Why is he now required to pay it back? I mean, granted, it was an overpayment, but it was not done intentionally, it was not done with fraud, it was just done.
Because it's characterized as unjust enrichment, okay?
All right, now for all of you
It's also
who,
a slot machine.
for everyone who talks about politics or bureaucracy and how things don't get done, this is what's going on right now. From his opinion, that's what we do when we get in. We have right now. We have colleagues that are pushing this philosophy that through no fault of the person's own.
This has nothing to do with the fraud side. That's totally outside the conversation.
Right, and I wasn't describing fraud, and I wasn't talking about intent, it was a question of entitlement. And if I'm unjustly enriched by a mistake by the bureaucracy or whatever, and it's established that I got more than I was entitled to, the state or Bank of America is entitled to get their money back. That's my only point. I'm not talking about the motive of the person and whether I knew I was unjustly enriched or whatever. I'm merely saying that that overpayment should go back to the state, whatever the intent was. Now, if it was fraudulent, the person, in theory, should go to jail. I'm not saying
Different conversation.
So what we're discussing here is what we're in the middle of discussing right now. I'm trying to figure out basically what's going to happen is everything's by a majority vote. What's going to happen is whoever has that majority and how this is done is going to make the determination on what we do. But I think they're getting ready to go. So for the future, anytime I come or in the meantime, reach out to my office. I'm more than happy to come out here, talk about different issues. We can talk about different philosophies. You're going to find that myself and my office are very open. Again, we concentrate a lot on constituent services, trying to be there for you. That's what we're elected there for. And we may not always agree on an issue, but we will tell you where we stand on the issue and and we will work to try to help you resolve your issue or whatever we can do in the community. So it's nice meeting you all, and hopefully I'll see you many more times between now and January.
So what I'll say is this, very knowledgeable, fights hard for the citizens he's elected to support, and he's been a great asset and ally, like I said, personally when I was in Auburn. So I want to thank you all for coming, and I think this is fantastic, to have this debate and to ask these questions, and I think it's my philosophy as well. You may not always like what I say or what we say, but at the end of the day, we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to do what we think is best for those we're entrusted to serve. So I thank Senator Moore This was the longest officially breakfast with the chief in the history of it. So that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. So, I thank you again for coming out. Please come back. Please come back next month when we're gonna have Town Manager Williams and Superintendent Bach. You can ask them the tough questions, we can debate, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.